So good evening, everybody. Welcome to our HMO and Council Tax webinar on the 7th of December 2022. Really delighted to be with you this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we've got a slightly different agenda lined up because our two key speakers are not able to join us this evening, sadly. So Alan Murdy, who is our barrister, specialist council tax barrister, who I know you would have heard lots about. He couldn't make it this evening, unfortunately. And unfortunately, neither could Darren, who is the the spokesman, if you like, for the council tax HMO reform group. So we thought we would do something just slightly different. And first of all, we would like to tell you a little bit about where we're up to with the campaign and just give you some feedback on where that's up to. You might be already up to speed with that, which is great. But in case you're not, we'd like to just explain what's been happening, what's been going on behind the scenes, and what we've been developing to help us all fight this iniquitous situation. Then I want to talk a little bit about a situation that I've become aware of over the last few days. And this is an interesting case because it also veers into planning. So we're going to really talk a little bit about that. Now, I'm not an expert on planning, but I've done a little bit of research, and Craig, who is actually on the line tonight and on the call tonight, is going to be his case that we're going to be taking a little bit of a look at. And what I hope to do is to share with you some of the information that we've gleaned from Alan about some of the best ways to address the situation if you find your HMO has been rebanded. So for those of you who are on the call tonight, first of all, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us on this rather cold evening. Do feel free to put your questions in the chat panel. And if we have some time, we would, of course, try and answer them as best as we can. But obviously, we're not the legal experts here. We're simply people who've learned from having our own experiences of dealing with the BOA and dealing with HMOs and council tax and local councils. So that's kind of our background and who we are. But I hope that tonight we can give you some practical steps and give you a bit of information about what seems to be working and perhaps some of the hacks that might be able to help you if you find yourself in this situation. So before we get going, can I just ask you all to just write in the chat panel tonight where you are, which part of the country you are from, where you're sitting watching this webinar from this evening, just to get a bit of interaction going, and so that you are engaged and kind of part of the group. So just write in the chat panel where you are this evening, just so we know that you can hear us and that you can see us. Emma is from Hampshire. Fantastic, Emma. Great, thank you so much. Daryl's in Northampton. Got Craig in Hull, and he's got properties at Scarborough. Actually, I can't quite remember whether you said where the HMO was, Craig, that we were talking about this week, but however, I'll come on to that in a bit. So Robert, we know you're down in Portsmouth. Well, I'm not sure if you live in Portsmouth, though. I think you perhaps don't quite live in Portsmouth, but I know you invest in Portsmouth. Oh, right, Craig. Okay, fine. So your HMO's in Scarborough. Fair enough. Ben, I can see you're online tonight, but I'm not sure where you are watching us from. Mikhail, again, I'm not sure quite where you might be watching us from this evening. Oh, Ben's in cold Bristol. Okay. And Ben, I know you've had this problem affect you with one of your HMOs. Could you just remind us again where that property was? Was that in Hull? I seem to remember it was somewhere in the northeast. Oh, it was Weston-super-Mare. I've got that completely wrong then, haven't I? No, it's in the southwest, Weston-super-Mare. Okay, fair enough. Thank you for that. Sometimes it's quite hard to keep track of all of these different situations and different properties that have been rebanded. At the moment, I probably have 5 to 6 calls or emails on a weekly basis from HMO landlords where this has happened. And we are trying to track it. And actually, in a moment, I'm going to introduce John to you, John's been a faithful member of the HMO Reform Group Committee for the last year, and his strength is in the IT side. So he's been really brilliant helping us to systemize, create spreadsheets, create lists, and he's going to share some of those with you this evening. So you can see what we've been doing and how we've been gathering data about this situation. So okay, great. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you all very much for being here this evening. Hopefully we can help you somewhat and give you some sort of updates. So John, I don't know if you're feeling, I know a lot of IT people don't kind of like to be seen. You want to be the geek with your Diet Coke sitting behind 3 big screens preferably, and totally anonymous to the outside world. But I'm going to ask you to share your camera if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure.
Here he is. Here he is.
Darren has a face for radio, and I have a face for not even going on radio. So, yeah, so I'm the one that's been pestering people to tell me and confirm who you've written to. So a lot of people have been writing, but we've been trying to keep track of who they are so that we can kind of pester the MPs who are being helpful. So let's just see.
John, it might actually be quite good if you could you just say why you got involved, a bit about your background and why you're involved and why you're on the committee, because I think that'd be quite helpful for people to understand that. They might not have kind of met you before.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an early victim, well, a victim of this, and my HMO got rebanded up in Barnsley, 4-bed mini HMO. So I went to my agents, what the heck's going on? And they had heard of Wendy, who was already writing about this. I think you'd maybe done the property magazine article on it or something. So they forwarded that to me. Then I spoke to you and so on and so forth. So as I've said to Wendy, it's very worrying when you first get this, and it's very helpful to have a group like this to go, here are the top tips on what to do if you've been banded, what to do and try and avoid it being banded, and so on and so forth. Which is where we'd like to, maybe me and Wendy would like to maybe put together some better pack on that side of thing, because Alan has a lot of very good information knowledge, but sometimes we can summarize it for you because we're taking notes and so on. So, but then this NC7 thing came along, and I think it'll not be the first and last time it'll not be the last time we ask you guys to write to your MPs. I'm sure maybe Darren is going to be going into talks with Gove and Newlock and all the rest. We'll probably be asking you to write to your MPs again to go, there's being discussed, please put pressure on Newlock to support this and to get the wording right and all the rest. So so if I'm hoping, Wendy, that people have mostly seen these spreadsheets.
Probably if you're in the Facebook group, I know not everybody's in the Facebook group. If you are, you probably would have seen these. But if you haven't, if you're not in the Facebook group, you won't have seen these spreadsheets. But yeah, if you want to share, John, that would be great. Thank you.
See if this works. Okay, that's me trying to join the Zoom meeting. I'm supposed to be the techie one, am I? I don't.
Yes. And you are the techie one.
So I had a couple of little links up my sleeve. These are the little short links we were asking you on how to write to your MP, the instructions, and then the spreadsheet on keeping track of them. I used to have 2 or 3 things on the go, and let's just see if I can. Yeah, that's fine. So, oh dear, tweak that a bit. All my screen things. So that was the instructions that you've all probably hopefully seen and followed. And how to get your MP. Here's the list of all the MPs that we are tracking, landlord specific letters, tenant specific letters, and then please let us know that you've written. So when you've posted on Facebook to go see my I've only got a little laptop here, and it's there we go. So this is the thing that I've been keeping track of. So we ended up putting it all in here. So that was the reminder of how to write to the MP. This is the amendment support. This is the actual amendment, which is that one there. That's the actual amendment. This shows the supporters on there. You know, one of the official supporters. There are more MPs than that, and they should be appearing on there. And we've been, let's just see if I can go. We've been keeping track of all of these. So the ones at the top are kind of front benchers who technically can't vote on this. So it's nice to write to them and all that, and we have written to some of them, but the ones we're really concentrating on, the ones who cannot vote on them. And then further down, we've got in green the supporters from that previous page. So they're all on there. And then we've got all the ones in yellow, the ones you guys have written to. And on the right here, you might see your name. I've tried to anonymize it a little bit, but you'll see your name if you've written to someone. That's all on there. So there's quite a few. We've written to 149. There are 272 who've never been written to, as far as I know. So there's room for improvement if we want to do it. But that's one to keep a little eye on. And the idea is, if you haven't written yet, have a little whiz through down below and look for your MP. If they have been written to, doesn't do any harm to write to them as well. But if they haven't been written to, it's even more impressive and helpful if you can add that, and go back to the instructions here on how to do that, the lettering and the template we use and all that. So that'll click on that. It should bring up the instructions. Let me know if any of these links have broken. But that's generally what we've been doing. And I think this list will, you know, be useful. We'd like to see a lot more yellows and a lot more greens as time goes on. And I think on the next wave, we'll maybe be picking you guys to go, here's another up-to-date letter of how we'd like to reach out to your MP.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually, John. We've got a committee meeting on Friday morning, so we'll be discussing what the next steps are. And as I'm sure many of you are aware, the amendment was proposed, but it wasn't actually dealt with in the reading in the House of Commons. Effectively, what happened was that the housing team, the housing department, effectively had a conversation with Caroline Dinage the day before. It was Michael Gove who had a conversation with her and wrote to her, and effectively sort of supported the amendment, although it wasn't, it hasn't gone into legislation yet. And Michael Gove wrote a very interesting letter. One of the sentences that he wrote was that, I think, I can't quite remember the wording, but it was something like HMOs should be treated as a single dwelling, except in exceptional circumstances. That has caused quite a little bit of sort of, you know, flurry of excitement and conversation and speculation about what that means. What the housing department have said is that they will be running a consultation in January. We think it will run for about 6 weeks. So they'll be consulting major participants and stakeholders in this whole law, in this whole you know, the ramifications of this particular amendment, which could affect the Valuation Office Agency, the Valuation Tribunal for England, local councils, any local government finance organisations. They will all be the ones that will want to contribute their views to this change, because we understand that there is quite a significant change. To what degree some of those individuals understand that remains to be seen. But clearly the government doesn't want to make a change like this without first having a consultation. So we are going to be very interested to see what the remit of that consultation is and what the questions are. We understood also that Darren and possibly Alan were going to be invited up to the House of Commons to meet with Michael Gove potentially and the rest of the housing team, or certainly certain members of the housing department, to be able to discuss that that amendment and discuss what the consultation might look like, and also to raise the issue about exceptional circumstances, because I think that's something we all really need clarity on. There's no good having an amendment that has gone into law, and then, you know, it kind of means that, say, John's 4-bed HMO in Barnsley, oh, that's exceptional, so that stays as a 4-bed banded HMO. You know, that's no good.
So I think, yeah, there's a certain stance that we would like. I mean, we would just like the NC7 wording to be put into law, make it very clear, remove the ambiguity, remove the discretion, and jobs are good. The problem is we may only be able to do that forward facing. We may be able to go back a couple of years. You know, so we'll have to see how our discussions go, and good luck to Darren in doing that, and Alan and whoever gets involved in directly talking about that. But
yeah,
what's the space, I suppose?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, John, you make a good point that what we might have to do is to create a new letter, and that might then start to be sent out in January, and that will be helping MPs to potentially comment on the consultation, or perhaps have more of a context about the consultation. So if they're asked about it, they can answer it with a little bit more kind of volition and knowledge.
Good, yeah, cool.
So yeah, so John, that's great, and I think your work has been really helpful collating all of that. So thank you very much indeed. It's been absolutely amazing, and I do just want to, you know, publicly acknowledge John for his work, not only actually with spreadsheets and things, but actually in terms of organising other documentation in the group and keeping our Google Drive organised, and you know, keeping it sorted.
A bad case of OCD. But many thanks to everyone who has written. It really is great, and it's nice that it's not all the same 2 or 3 MPs. It's starting to get quite a spread. So it's really good.
Yeah, it is. And in fact, even this week, I've had quite a few people download the pack still from our website. We're getting quite a few downloads on that. What we don't know is whether they then go ahead and print off the letter and sign it and send it. That's the part that we still lack a little bit of feedback on. So whether we can make that a little bit tighter, we'll have to discuss that. We could probably do some kind of automation to.
There is better automation on this, but it takes a bit of, I think on this one, we had to sort of do a bit of a best efforts, get it out there. There are better techie ways of doing it, which we'll have to look into.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very true. So the good news is, you know, I do think that we are pressing forward. Now, John, where is your case up to with your 4-bed HMO?
My case is I'm playing hardball with the Barnsley Council, going, oh, so you've rebranded me. Okay, well, I as the landlord am not responsible then. Can you refund everything that I've paid you in the last couple of years? And get this, they wouldn't do it until I told them all about my tenants. So I sent them license agreements for the tenants. And then all of a sudden I got some refunds on what I'd paid. And then of course my poor tenants started getting letters. So I've been on to them to give them tips on what to do, how to write to MPs, not to pay their tax, don't do anything yet. We're trying to get this sorted politically. But yeah, it's a bit of a in my case, like, I'm still in the appeal process, so I haven't even had my appeal, and the VTS are very slow at hearing my case, which I kind of don't mind because it's buying me time to look into other possibilities. Yeah, it's a case of managing the tenants then and helping them to, you know, not worry too much about this. I've got my own long-term plans as to what to do if it all goes terribly wrong, but I'll keep those to myself. Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, in Darren's case, he's got a lot more rooms. He's already been banded. It's a different scenario, and I think this is one of the things we have to look at is, you know, what's the advice if you've not been banded yet, if you've just been banded, if you haven't been appealed, you're going to win your appeal. I mean, I've said to Darren that if it all goes through as of, say, April 2023, no one gets rebanded unless it's a huge HMO, then we ought to be able to at least appeal what's happened to us.
Yes.
If you were to appeal, if I was to win my appeal now, I would go, the Barnsley County would go, oh, terribly sorry, we did, you know, we're just doing as we're told, here's your money back. And I think up to 2 or 3 years, that ought to happen. That's my personal view, but we'll have to see how the dust settles on it.
I think that's going to be the next question, isn't it? Once the law is passed to say that no future HMOs can be rebanded, then what happens to all the ones that have been rebanded in the last 5, 7, 10 years even? What is the statute of limitation on appeals?
Yeah, that would be an interesting bit of stats, actually, is of the members, who's been rebanded and when, and what have you done? Have you had to just reluctantly pay? Have you had to reluctantly let the tenants pay? Have you had come to some agreement between you? I don't know, because it'd be interesting to see, because we've been thinking about this as, you know, as part of our discussions with Dulac. You know, what are the few scenarios that we're dealing with? I imagine it doesn't go that far back, but maybe we've only noticed it in the last couple of years. But pretty, you know. So
Ben, you said if we appeal backdated banding, then the landlord will be liable. I'm not quite sure what you mean about that. If you appeal,
well, to me, if I win my appeal, I as a landlord get to pay a one band house thing, and we've all wanted to do that all along. So as it happens, I was like overpaying my council tax until I got advice from Alan to stop paying it. I'm 4 years in credit with my small single banded house, you know, because I started paying for room 2, 3, 4, which, you know, in my case, they started to refund slightly and then try and target the tenants, which I'm trying to drag their heels. But if we were all to win our appeals, we would basically go back to band A, B, or C, whatever it is, for the size of your house, and jobs are good, and that's what we've all wanted.
Yes.
The complication is if the tenants have had to pay someone, they want a refund and all the rest.
Yes.
That's where the fun lies.
Yes.
I think that's maybe part of our argument to the government is like, if you want us to pay this tax, let us pay this tax. Trying to find the tenants to pay the tax could be tricky.
Yes. Well, as in the case of Darren, where there's 2 full-time housing officers, council tax officers, who have been employed to find his previous tenants so they can charge them rather for the council tax for the rebanded rooms. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's not going to happen. It's totally unrealistic to think you can find those people and then charge them for council tax, particularly because at the time the room wasn't banded. So I don't think that's at all fair. I know that we've had this discussion about when can you sort of retrospectively charge someone for tax, but I think that's completely wrong. If that property was not already banded, if that room was not already banded when the tenant moved in, as far as they were concerned, the council tax was being paid by the tenant. So for the VOA to then backdate it and then insist that the tenants pay, it's the logical thing, and it's absolutely, from the point of view of the landlord, that's exactly the right thing that they should do. They should say this, and once it's been backdated, now the tenants are liable, because actually no one will then pay it, and then the council might realise what a ridiculous situation it is.
So Ben's example is one where, you know, he's had to give them a bit of a discount on the rooms and let the tenants pay, and that's similar to what Darren's had to do. He's kind of had to do a halfway house with it, and this is yet one of those complicated scenarios now where, well, what do we do? I mean, in that case, probably best to go, it's up to the landlord but you know, you could either appeal that and try and get back anything you've paid, but you might be better off to go, right, well, as of 2023, it's
exactly,
and figure it out. If it becomes a can of worms, this is the thing.
It is because yes, I see Ben's argument that effectively he's taken a pragmatic approach to say, how can I keep my tenants now that their rooms are being banded for council tax? I will discount the rent slightly to enable them to afford the extra, which is the council tax. And you're right, you would have done a deal with those tenants. And if now suddenly it gets backdated all the way to the beginning, then you're losing out because they get their council tax back, but you don't get any extra rent because they've moved out by now.
No.
So I think the point at which the legislation gets passed, there will be this is one, of course, of the objections that we think the VOA may recognise and may raise. So as a group, we have to come up with some practical suggestions and solutions for this.
Be ready for the VOA's objections like this and go, okay, well, that's one of the scenarios we thought of. We think this will probably be the best way forward.
Yeah.
But one thing's for sure, none of us asked for this, okay? This was imposed on all of us, and this has cost us tenants, cost us time, cost us solicitors' fees, maybe, all of which we didn't have to deal with and shouldn't have ever had to deal with. One thing we'll never get is an apology for the VOA.
No.
What we'd like is for them to be reasonable moving forward. We're not going to get the guy who's committed suicide over this. His life isn't going to come back, is it?
No.
So, and I tell you what, if it goes the wrong way, a lot of other guys may feel suicidal in the future. So it is very vital that we get this right, and it doesn't get good.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we're fighting, we're continuing to fight. We are still raising this with various different media organisations. Darren is due to be interviewed by Moneybox. It didn't happen on the first week because another news item came up and pushed him off the agenda. He couldn't do last weekend. I'm not sure about this Saturday, whether it's going to be happening this Saturday.
They only want Darren because he's the pretty one in the group.
He's got the loudest voice.
Yeah.
And also he's got the experience, having had it happen to him. He's got very, very valuable experience, and also he's got some very good connections, and he's been pushing this with his MP. And well, actually, I think Penny Mordaunt is his MP, but she can't because she's a front bencher, but she's a minister. But certainly with Caroline Dinage, he's made a lot of very good connections there, and she's very supportive. So he's done tremendously on that front.
Even my MP, Mr. Gove, has
of course
started to veer in the right direction.
Yes, quite exactly, John. It's fantastic, and what an amazing coincidence that you live in Michael Gove's constituency.
Well, it's such a pleasure.
I can imagine. But that's been a great thing to have as well. So okay, great. So Stephen asked, when is Darren due to speak with ministers? Well, you might have heard on the announcement that came in that Dehenna Davison made in the House of Commons. She said we'll be speaking to Mr. Brewer this week. Well, that didn't happen.
I heard the 12th.
Oh, okay. Okay, right, good. Okay, so next week sometime. When we have our meeting on Friday, we'll no doubt catch up with Darren and Alan then and pick their brains about what they've heard.
Yeah, and we need to arm Darren with some juicy info before he goes into that. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
It might be a long, drawn-out process. That might just be an initial chat.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's helpful if Alan does go, because Alan has obviously got the legal ammunition to be able to put them right about certain presumptions they have at the moment about the way that the VTE deals with these cases, which is not as fair and legal as they believe it is. So
excellent. We can let Alan loose on them. Excellent.
Yes, quite. Okay, great. So I hope that kind of brings you up to date with everything, with where we're up to. We keep fighting. I think we've made some really good steps forward, but what we don't want to do is to lose momentum. So we'll obviously keep you informed as to what the next steps are going to be and what we think will be the most effective course of action come January and come Darren's meeting and Alan's meeting with the Department of Levelling Up. And hopefully from that, we'll have a bit more clarity about what our next steps will be.
Indeed.
Okay, so the next thing I wanted to do this evening was to kind of have a look at a bit of a case that has come to my attention. So Craig, I wonder if you would be willing for me to make you a panelist and then maybe co-host, so you could speak on your own behalf and explain your situation. So I'll just promote you. Okay, make you co-host. Okay, so Craig, if you're able to put your video on, your camera and your microphone, if you don't mind. Fine, I think you're just on mute at the moment. If you just want to unmute yourself, Craig.
Okay.
Yeah, that's better. That's fantastic. Great. Well, listen, very nice to see you in the flesh. Well, through a screen.
Indeed.
So Craig, thank you ever so much for being here this evening. Really appreciate it. So you contacted me I think earlier this week or last week sometime, and really explained about your situation. Perhaps for the sake of the group, would you be able to just tell us a bit more about what's happened to you, and then maybe we can point you in some direction anyway as to help and guidance for your current situation.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Yeah, first of all, pleased to be joining this group. Up to 2 weeks ago, I thought I was the only person in the country that was having to deal with this problem. I've been troubled with this since September 2019, and back then, as soon as it happened to me when I got notified in November 19, I just couldn't find any help anywhere. I Googled and spoke to my local NRLA group, and they just shrugged the shoulders and said, "We don't know what you're talking about." And then obviously January 2020, so only sort of 2 months, 3 months into this, COVID came along, and it's caused such a massive burden on me work-wise from this problem and COVID. I'm now only just coming out the other side of it to try and resolve what my problems are.
Okay, so could you give us a bit of context then, Craig? Yeah. Tell us a bit about the property, when you bought it, what you did to it, etc.
Yeah, so basically I purchased a property in Scarborough in January 2019, which was a large office block. I applied for planning permission to convert it to a student HMO, which was capable of having 28 ensuite bedrooms. The planning permission was to split it into 4 separate cluster flats of 2 by 8 bedrooms and 2 by 6 bedrooms. The work was finished in September 2019, ready for the students to arrive. And as far as I was aware, the council were going to issue me with 4 separate council taxes, 1 for each of the blocks. November 2019, I suddenly got advised by the council, not the VOA, the council, that I was going to suddenly get 28 A-banded assessments. The council couldn't tell me anything about why this was happening. And as I say, I couldn't find anything else out anywhere. At the time, I didn't particularly worry too much of the financial aspects, because obviously with students, they are exempt. So I obviously advised all the students to write to the council and get exemptions with their course enrolment certificates. The problem, however, is a bigger one, in as much as I instantly saw the value of my property devalued, because I couldn't do anything else with this property other than students, as a long-term view. But the complications of the admin has been horrendous, because students don't follow their instructions, and the vast majority of them over the past 3 years now have not submitted their documents to the council. So I would say out of the 80 or so students have now passed through this building. I would say perhaps 60 of them are being chased by the council through the courts because they haven't paid the council tax, but they're not due to it. But you know, the fact that they didn't submit the documents is actually the students' fault. But every day there are massive piles of documents arriving for students that left 3 years ago, basically telling them that they're in court and so on. So that has created a massive admin problem that I've had to try and deal with on that respect. During the summer, the problem obviously does come back to me, because between June and September, with the students not being in the properties, the council then charges me council tax again on all those rooms. I then have to tell them in September who's taking over the rooms, but the council sometimes don't take any notice of that. And as an example, today I've just received council tax bills for two of those bedrooms, which I notified the council 18 months ago who was in those rooms. So I can only imagine that within Scarborough Council's council tax department, they are going round and round in circles, chasing students for money. They're certainly not keeping up with the admin of what I advise them on. And it is an absolute admin nightmare, because we also get 28 demands for TV licenses, gas bills, electric bills, you name it. My workload has just gone through the roof this last three years. And it's cost me a lot of money, because I just haven't been able to get on with running the business properly. It's all just been dealing with this 28-bedroom property. And there's so many anomalies, because obviously I pay all of the gas, electric, etc. for the whole property that comes through one meter. But bizarrely, this £150 rebate that was offered earlier this year, all of the students ended up getting the £150 by 28 times, because they are the tenants in those rooms, even though they don't have any gas or electric. It's just absolutely bizarre. But I mean, that's just an aside. In terms of what happened to me with the VOA, I had absolutely no notification from them. To this day, I've had no notification from them. So had I not been informed by Scarborough Council in November 2019 what was happening, I wouldn't have known anything about this until the bills actually landed in my post box. Yeah, it's just an absolute nightmare. You know, trying to deal with a property that is 28 bedrooms and you know, this is on top of another 120 rooms that I have in other HMOs in Scarborough and in Hull, which are not treated in this way. They are treated as single properties.
Yes.
And as far as I can tell, I am the only person in Scarborough that this has happened to. And obviously it's very, very unfair.
Yes.
But my main point is that this property is actually run on behalf of the university under a nomination agreement.
Yes, so you told me about this. Now, I haven't heard of this before. So can you explain what is a nomination agreement, please, Craig?
Well, basically, I have a backstop from the university. So I provide this property for their incoming first-year students. And the university provides me with the names of the students to go into the property. And the tenancy is actually between me and the students themselves. But if the university doesn't fill all the rooms, then the university pays me. So I have a backstop that I'm constantly full, if you like. But it is they call it a nomination agreement, but it is in effect a contract to provide them with a halls of residence.
Okay. So effectively, they're a bit like a guarantor.
Yes, basically, they are the backstop to make sure that the revenue stream is there, whether I have one student in the 28-bed block or I have 28. If I have 28, then obviously I get 28 rents from 28 students. If I
So it'd
only
be
have,
quite interesting, wouldn't it, if you didn't advertise the house at all, or the four houses, which yeah, let's call it four houses because that's what you believe it to be through the planning
Yes. Yeah.
cycle. If you didn't fill that at all, the university would pay you for those rooms.
Yes,
I
that's
wonder
correct.
if the valuation office or agency would then go after the university.
I don't know.
Because of course at that stage you haven't actually got anybody in what's called rateable occupation. You've got no tenants in the property.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment I do have a handful of rooms that are empty, and obviously the council bill me for the empty rooms, so I am paying the council tax on those rooms, so I'm literally paying £1,200 per room per year on those. But the point I'm trying to make is that I think that this whole property should be totally exempt under a Class M exemption, which is a halls of residence. But nobody from the valuation office ever asked me that question.
No, quite.
You know, that agreement was in place from March 2019 while the works were going on to prepare this property.
Yes.
And when I got, if the valuation office had approached me and told me that they were going to ban my properties, I could have spoken to them and said, well, hang on, you know, this should be a Class M property.
Yes.
But the council couldn't do that because they don't have the authority to do that. And I didn't find out about the ability to appeal on this until July 2020, when I actually found some letters that were left over from the students. And in one of those letters that had gone to one of the students, it did say, if you don't agree with this banding of this property, then, you know, sorry, not the banding, but the actual fact that it was being applied to council tax in, that you could apply. But obviously there was only a 6-month window of opportunity to do that. And I didn't find out until 10 months afterwards. So I have actually now sat on that for all this time because I didn't know whether I could still appeal. I didn't know how to appeal. And I've not been able to find any advice anywhere until now. And as I say, COVID then came in March 2020. And on top of all of this that was already going on, you know, the admin problems have been horrendous for me in dealing with all of this. Yeah, hopefully there might be some positives coming out of this group. But,
well, I don't know. So one of the things that I did, because Alan couldn't be here this evening, Craig, I wrote to Alan and asked him for some advice on your situation and gave him some, because you had very kindly written to me and given me some information. So he has actually sent me, in fact, I'll share this on the screen and I can send this to you.
Okay,
he sent me the copy of something called Sulets. I don't know if you've heard of Sulets. So this was a case that came before the Valuation Tribunal. This was in 2017, I believe, and this is a very similar situation.
Right.
So this was where a Student Union Lettings Limited, which is a private limited company based in Leicestershire, had, like your property, built a large block of student flats, effectively student rooms, student HMOs, which were, to all intents and purposes, a purpose-built student accommodation, or they were certainly, you know, halls of residence. And you can see the summary of the decision here. The appeals are dismissed. So the appellant, the Student Union Lettings Limited, went to Leicester City Council and said, we believe this is a Class M halls of residence, so it should be exempt from council tax. And effectively, it was the Valuation Tribunal dismissed it, which is utterly ridiculous. And to this day, Alan thinks it was a completely wrong decision. And you can see here that the appellant brought these appeals under Section 16 of the Local Government Finance Act, etc., but the student dwellings known as did not fulfil the requirements of the Class M exemption from council tax liability. Now, the interesting thing is there's another paragraph here about legislation. And it says that Class M is one such exemption, a dwelling comprising a hall of residence provided predominantly for the accommodation of students, which obviously yours is, which is either A, owned or managed by an institution, or B, the subject of an agreement allowing such an institution to nominate the majority of the persons who are to occupy the accommodation so provided. Now, yours fits into B, doesn't it?
Sounds like it, yes. Yep.
Absolutely. There's also a further exemption, which is Class N. I don't know if you're aware of this one. So this is a dwelling which is either occupied by one or more residents, all of whom are relevant persons, and in this case, a relevant person would be a student,
Yeah.
or occupied only by one or more relevant persons as term time accommodation. And a relevant person means a student spouse, etc.
Yep.
So I will send this to you, Craig,
yes,
so you can have you can read through of this case. And Alan was the he represented the appellant in this particular case, and obviously he lost the case very sadly. But I think it's worth you seeing the arguments about this particular situation and why they decided that this wasn't in fact student accommodation. Our experience of dealing with the valuation tribunal and the group's experience, and I'm sure there's other people on this call, on this webinar tonight who would testify to this, is that you will lose if you go to appeal. As yet, we haven't had one case where we've challenged HMOs for individual room banding for council tax and won it.
Right.
We have lost every single case that's gone to appeal.
Yeah.
So what we're saying to people at the moment is, while you must enter an appeal, it's vital that you enter an appeal. It's vital that you make your case. You almost put the case there to be appealed. What you have to do in the meantime is really start to be fairly aggressive with the council, because under the Local Government Finance Act, they are the ones who are responsible for billing. The VTE, the Valuation Office Agency, the VOA, is responsible for banding, council tax banding. That is really all they are there to do. And their role is to assess how much a property would have been worth in 1992 if it was in existence then. They have to kind of take it all the way back to 1992. Now, they then say, right, okay, because this is just a room, it can't be worth any more than £40,000 in 1992. So we will band it as a Band A property. And we're all very familiar with that procedure. But once they've done that, you may start to receive bills. And that's exactly where most people, find that the next step in the process is that they've had the Valuation Office rebanding procedure. And like you, Craig, they might not have even had any communication with the VOA to say it's been done. So they've got no awareness that this has happened. And then suddenly they receive a bill from the council tax billing authority, the local authority, to say, right, you owe us council tax. Now, of course, council tax is levied in such a way as to make us all feel pretty scared that if we don't pay it, we'll get into some financial problems or trouble, or be under the law will get us. It's going to affect our, it's going to affect our credit rating. We're going to be going to jail, and because most landlords try and stay on the right side of the law all the time, we're all very compliant and we pay and we say, oh no, okay, this is dreadful. Okay, I'll have to pay. And you look at your bottom line and you think, well, that was a terrible investment because I'm just really making hardly anything now. And maybe even the value of my property has not grown because I'm now, can't sell it because nobody else is going to want to take this on. Well, actually, the right course of action is to not pay. The right course of action is to trigger activity from the local authority, because under the 1992 Local Government Finance Act, they have the discretion to bill you according to their own jurisdiction, if you like. So they can come to you and say, look, Craig, we know that the VOA has rebanded all these rooms individually, but we can see that actually that is not going to work because A, it's going to be an admin nightmare. B, you're probably not going to pay it. C, the students probably aren't going to pay it. Can we come to some agreement? And they have discretion under the 1992 LGFA to do such an act, but they choose not to use it. But what they could do is they could come to you and say, we would charge you as if the first two properties are band C, for example, and the second two properties are band B.
Yep.
And then they would come up with a monthly council tax amount. They would make you liable for that because it's an HMO, and under the 2004 Housing Act, you are liable if it is a house of multiple occupation. And therefore, you would then be entitled to, you would be responsible for paying that council tax. But it would enable by not paying, what you would be doing is you would be triggering their a magistrate's court. What's the word I'm looking for? I suppose process. What would happen is you would get a summons to the magistrate's court. Now, the way to deal with that is if you have already written in an appeal to the Valuation Office Agency, and and I'll just say this for the sake of everybody else, this won't apply to you, but you can do this on the government website. If you search on Google appeal council tax, you can go on to the government, and I think it's something like tax.council.gov.uk or something like that. There is an online system whereby you can appeal your council tax bill. If your house, or in this situation, the building has been banded, unfortunately, you have to do it room by room. So in your case, you'd have to do 28 separate entries, which is a very time-consuming process. But what that does is they will then give you a reference number. Now, if this is you can do that if it's within 6 months since the VOA rebanded your property. Obviously, because yours is longer than that, it's likely that you would not be able to go through the online process, because the online process will only stay live for 6 months. They give you 6 months to appeal rebanding, but after 6 months, effectively, that window closes. So if this had been within 6 months, that's what I would be recommending you to do, is to go online, lodge the appeal, take down those reference numbers. Then when you get the summons from the county court, from the local authority, you write to the court, you write to the magistrate and you say, please, will you adjourn the summons? Because I am going through an appeal with the Valuation Office Agency, and here are all my reference numbers. And the magistrate is bound to allow you time to deal with your appeal before they summons you for council tax. Because if the matter has not been settled about your legal liability for council tax, they cannot enforce you pay council tax while there is a question mark about your legal liability. Now, in your case, because this has happened prior to the 6 month window, your best bet is actually now to appeal direct to the Valuation Office, probably through a complaints process. Because if you go through the appeals process, they will say, oh, you're out of time. So for you, Craig, I would suggest you write a very strongly worded complaints letter and state the dates in your case to say when you first heard, how you first found out that your house had been rebanded, and why you believe the VOA judgment was wrong. And I think it's very important that you outline why you believe your property to be a residential, halls of residence, and that it does meet the Class M and actually the Class N requirements. I would also complain that nobody has done a site visit, because on the VOA website, they claim that they will visit a property, and no one has actually visited your property in person.
Yep.
Now, if they had done, they would have seen your agreement with the university. What did you call it again?
Nomination agreement.
Nomination agreement. Sorry, thank you. Nomination agreement. You could have shown them that paperwork. You could have even potentially got somebody from the university on site at the same time to ratify that.
Yep.
You could also have explained to them, they could have seen for themselves how this building was now effectively 4 individual units, and that each of those units had its own kitchen and, you know, was laid out in such a way to be its own HMO, and therefore that this should not be disaggregated, because these are not individual self-contained flats. They presumably just have an ensuite and that's it, is it? And there's a shared kitchen.
Yeah, shared kitchen and corridors and communal areas. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think the second argument in your favour is also that, so this is an argument that the valuation office will often use, and they sometimes start with this, and I find this absolutely infuriating. It makes my blood boil, because I think it is so unjust. Anyway, just calm down for a moment, Wendy. They will say, can you show us your tenancy agreements? And for many people who are on the call today, that's what they would have been asked. They would have been asked to send their tenancy agreements in. And I would say, you should not send in your tenancy agreements. But the reason they will ask you for your tenancy agreements is because what they're trying to test is what they call rateable occupation. There are 4 tests of rateable occupation. And what is so incredibly infuriating about this is that these 4 tests emanate from business rates case law. It does not emanate from residential case law, it emanates from business rates case law. So what happened was, there was a situation where some guy, let's call him Bob, had a friend called Brian, and Brian had an industrial unit, let's you know, sort of shed in a field, and it was empty, and Bob occasionally had some goods that he wanted to store. And so he went to his friend Brian and said, listen, Brian, can I just store some of my goods here from time to time? You know, every so often I'm going to need to just put some gardening equipment there, but it's not going to be there very long, and then I'm going to you know, take it out. And Brian said, yeah, that's fine, just, you know, just pay me £5 a day whenever you want to rent it, because it just covers my insurance, and, you know, that's fine. So the council found out about this, and the council went to Bob and said, right, Bob, because you're using Brian's building, we now want to charge you business rates, because we think that business rates is due, because this is a business arrangement, it's a business location, you're using this premises for business. And Bob says, well, hold on a minute, you can't just charge me business rates. I've just got this private agreement with Brian. It's just a commercial building. Well, it's just like a shed. And I don't see why you should charge business rates. Anyway, the council said, no, we're in charge. We'll tell you what we should be able to charge you. We're going to charge you business rates on this particular unit. So long story short, this goes to, I think it went to the upper tribunal. It might have gone to the High Court, but anyway, it went to the upper tribunal. And at the upper tribunal, the judge said, well, let's define what we mean by rateable occupation. In other words, what are the tests that somebody would have to pass in order to demonstrate that we can rate, that we can bill them, in this case, business rates, for using that premises? And after a long period of discussion, these were the 4 conclusions that he drew. First of all, that the occupation of the building must be actual. So in other words, you can't just sort of say, oh, well, I might use it for my gardening equipment, but then you don't use it. You actually have to use it for your gardening equipment. There has to be an actual use of the building. The second one is beneficial. It has to benefit you in some way from using the building. And in this case, it was benefiting Bob because he was having his equipment protected. It wasn't being left out in the rain and rusting. He was having a benefit. It has to be not too transient. So in other words, a night or two, a week or two, that's far too transient. You can't charge business rates on somebody who's using a shed for a couple of weeks. That's ridiculous. And it has to be exclusive. In other words, Bob is not sharing this with 10 other people. Now, if it meets those 4 tests, said the judge at the time, then that property passes the test, or should we say the arrangement between Bob and Brian, it passes the test of rateable occupation. It is therefore a rateable business, it's a rateable arrangement, and we can therefore charge business rates on it. And those 4 tests have been basically in law since then, which was a good number of years ago, 20 years ago. What's happened though is that the Valuation Office Agency have adopted those for the residential market, with no recognition, no admittance, no consultation to ask whether this is relevant. So what they're doing is they're saying, well, if somebody has got actual, beneficial, not too transient and exclusive occupation of a room, we now determine that to be a dwelling. We determine that to be rateable, and we're going to say that the local council can apply council tax on that room. And in a general AST, if you have a normal assured short hold tenancy, it confers actual, beneficial, not too transient and exclusive occupation, because all those 4 tests are met within the agreement of the AST. So therefore, you could conclude that 9 months out of 12, your students, although they are actually de facto exempt, but your students would be, if they weren't students, liable for council tax. Okay, we may, although we might argue with it, we may accept that argument. But if that's the case, why is it that for 3 months of the year, when they are not there and where rateable occupation is not happening, why are you therefore being charged? Because those 4 tests are not being met between June and September, because nobody is living there.
Yep.
So how dare they charge you for council tax when no rateable occupation is occurring? And that is the premise on which they are rating the room in the first place. You can see why I get so hot under the collar about this, because it's literally, we'll tell you how high to jump. You know, we say jump, you say how high. That's the problem with the VOA. So the approach you'll have, well, it's again, Craig, I'm not going to tell you what to do. It's your building, it's your business. I can't tell you what I would do. But I think in your situation, you have to start to be incredibly bloody minded about it and say to them, I'm not going to pay a penny more council tax until I have this settled. And once the council will get very hot under the collar about it, because they'll want to summons you, etc. If you've put in, okay, maybe an outdated appeal, and it might have to go through, like I said, the complaints process to the valuation office. And you also should complain to the council that they are not using their discretion under section 551 of the 1992 Local Governments Finance Act, which they have discretion to do. So complain about that as well. You are not paying a penny more of council tax. Now, the good thing is they can't send you to prison. That's the good news. It's not an offence punishable by imprisonment. It will probably be upsetting, and it will be stress making, and it will be difficult. But personally, I think this is something that we actually have to recognise. We need to make their life difficult. They made our life difficult. It's time we made their lives difficult. And I also think in tandem with that, as a group, as you can see, we are potentially very close to some kind of a solution. So what we want to try and do is oversee that solution, but we also want to make sure that people like you have, if you like, have a delay on the case being concluded, so that by the time we have this in law, you have got that as a mechanism to say, oh, great, right, this should never have been rebanded. In your case, because it's been going on since 2019, there's a little bit of a backlog, but I think that there could potentially be quite a good solution for you, which would be to look back at what that, almost to dismiss all the current outstanding bills, to dismiss everything that goes against the students, and simply to backdate it to that time. And then any council tax you have paid, in addition to what you would have paid if you just had 4 council tax bills, they would refund you. And it might be something for you almost to come up with a figure. In fact, last week I suggested to somebody that he made a suggestion to the local council about what they should charge him for council tax, because the local government has discretion to do that, but they don't want to use it, because they're worried if they use it with you, they're going to get this avalanche of people coming and saying, use it with me, use it with me, use it with me. Well, that's what the law is there to be used. If you don't like it, it shouldn't be in the law. We didn't make the rules, you made the rules. Now live by the rules.
Yep, quite great.
Now, what do you think about what I've said? I've kind of given it to you with both barrels there, Craig. I'm so sorry.
No,
You probably weren't expecting that on the call tonight.
There's an awful lot of good advice in there, and it's tackling it in a different way to what I would have. I have gone through my head so many different scenarios of how I might be able to tackle this. So you've certainly given me some food for thought there. One thing which I am quite interested in is what you say about the discretion that they've got under the 1992 Act, because if I remember rightly, I do need to go back in all my notes, but when this first happened and I started discussing this with the council tax in Scarborough, I'm pretty certain that I was told by the officers I was dealing with that their head of department was all behind me in trying to get this matter resolved.
Ah,
now,
interesting.
Yes, it's interesting, but he must have been aware that he had the discretion to override this, whereas he sort of kicked the can down the road to me, saying, "Well, you sort it out, and we'll back you up." Now, I'm pretty certain it was the guy in the council tax, but I do need to check all of that. But that is very interesting to know. I can go back and quote that to them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's quite a lot there for me to digest and possibly look at and see what to do. But yeah, I think you're quite right about not going for an appeal, because obviously I am out of time on that with the VOA. But yes, maybe a complaint might be the way to do it.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think your situation is a little bit different because it's a very big HMO. You've got this, arrangement with the university. It's a student HMO as well, so that means that most of the time it's exempted. But I completely understand about the admin headache. You almost think I wish that they weren't exempted, because then they would pay, and they might pay for 12 months, and it would free me up, and I don't have to have the admin of when they're not there. But my argument would be I'm not paying council tax when the students aren't there, because these are rooms and it's not a house, it's not in my estimation a dwelling. I disagree with your definition of a dwelling, and therefore I don't believe rateable occupation exists between June and September, so therefore I'm not paying the council tax. And if they want to fight you, fine, be my guest, is what I'd be saying to them.
Yeah. Okay, very good.
Now, Craig, thank you very much for coming on this evening. You've sort of been a little bit of a guinea pig for us tonight, but I do appreciate that, and we'd love to hear how you get on, and what your next steps are. Before we finish this evening, I would like to just kind of maybe suggest to other people, if you've got any questions about what we've talked about tonight, or if you have any thoughts about it. I've got some great questions actually, or comments in the chat panel, which I'll just read out. Where other people are up to. I know people at different stages of challenging and different stages of fighting this. Stephen says all councils seem to swerve their discretionary ability. I've been challenging Greenwich on this basis, but falls on deaf ears and push me back to the VOA appeal. Yeah, nobody wants to make a decision. You've got our support in that one, Stephen. David says it would be interesting to track if anyone is rebanded from this point onwards, or the VOA will put ongoing new assessment cases on hold. Exactly, good point, until after the consultation is finished. And that's a very, very good point. We've been actually telling people to download the letter, the Michael Gove letter from the Facebook group, and use that as ammunition to say, look at what Michael Gove, who is the Secretary of State for Housing, is saying, which is that an HMO should be a single dwelling unless exceptional circumstances apply. Now, we have had a couple of people use that, and in one case, the VOA said, until the new legislation is passed, we are going to carry on with our current policy, almost up yours, stuff you, we're still carrying on. I would say up your stuff you, so are we. But that's because I don't mind a fight, and because this is a fight we're going to win. Are you aware of anyone who has received confirmation of rebanding since the consultation has been announced? Again, that's a really good question. Let me have a quick think. So since the consultation was announced in the House of Commons, which was 2 weeks ago, no. I have not had anybody, all the people that I've spoken to or who've written to me, it happened prior to that, which is interesting, isn't it? One to note for the books. So this is one that we should keep our eye on. And I'm kind of perhaps also just saying this to John as well, but John, we should keep an eye on this as a group to see, are we seeing a reduction in VOA activity as a result of this? Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. That's an excellent point, David. Yeah, thank you for that. So, I mean, I think that in terms of individual practice, you unfortunately you have to become quite aggressive, quite feisty. You have to learn about this. Again, I know some people aren't on Facebook, so perhaps get somebody else who is on Facebook who could help you with this, or send, write to us, and we'll try and give you some more information. As John said, we're actually trying to put a bit more of an FAQ file together for people that we can upload on the website. It's just been incredibly busy for us, so we haven't quite got around to doing that, but I think that would be very helpful, that we could then suggest what activity, what action you could take if you find yourself in this situation. Or in the case of you, Craig, where you've just discovered us as a group, you've sat and kind of been dealing with this on your own for nearly 3 years. Now you realize help has arrived, but what does that look like for you? So we need to perhaps do something like that. So John, we'll discuss that perhaps on Friday at our committee meeting, and try and push forward on that. I just want to really leave by saying there is hope, that help is here, help is on the horizon. We believe that we will change this iniquitous practice. It may take some time to iron out some of the the lumps and bumps, which are the exceptional circumstances that we still don't really understand what that means. But we're all a very determined group, and we are absolutely committed to making this happen. And since we formed this time last year, I think that was kind of when the committee first kind of got going, and John joined, and Darren and I have met each other, and we brought Alan on board, and then we've got other people like Matt and other people on board the committee now as well, which is great. Things have gone from strength to strength. So I think with that kind of force of personality and commitment behind this issue, and the clarity that we have from the legal side, I see no reason why we shouldn't overturn this and win this, but it just takes a bit of patience and a bit of faith, and that's the way I believe to get there. Okay, but anyway, thank you so much, Craig, for being this evening. I know you've been asked a case study this evening, but that's really helpful. Stephen says we now repost / tweet every time our local council posts anything about the cost of living crisis. Well done, I love it. Stating they are unfairly taxing their youngest and most vulnerable renters within the borough. Yeah, that's fantastic. We do have a Twitter feed as well. I think it's CT HMOs. Perhaps I'll send it out, actually, when I send out the recording for this meeting. I'll send out the Twitter feed as well, so if you want to follow us on Twitter, you can do that, and repost tweets that we put out as well. So anyway, thank you all very, very much for being here this evening. Really appreciate your attendance here. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. This has been recorded. It'll be sent out with the notes for tonight's webinar, and just keep going, everybody. You're doing a great thing in fighting it. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Cheers.
Take care. Bye.